All right. Speaking of things that are both exciting and a little scary, we're going to actually talk about donor advised funds this week. So we'll talk about donor advised funds and how to secure more of these gifts. And here's a quick, actually, before we get to agenda, one quick note is that this class is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. So for those of you that don't know what this is, it's a professional certification. If you don't know, it's probably not that important to you. If you do know, we actually know that a lot of your professional development budgets have been zeroed out or reduced a little bit. You know, some of you are going to conferences that that are now canceled, and so this is really important. So the way to get this credit is at the end of this session. There's just a quick question in the survey that says, should we make a note for CFRE credit for you? And then nothing else needs to happen. So in the rare case that you get audited by CFRE, we'll then be able to back you up with some records. But for the most part, we're not going to send a certificate or anything else, just so you know in advance. So thank you to my colleague Simone for making that possible. Agenda today, we'll do some intros. We'll do some very basics on donor advised funds to make sure we're all caught up with the same language. And then we'll actually talk about where giving is right now over the last 2 years, what we expect to happen in 2021. And we'll talk about why that's happening. So often we talk about donor advised funds as this important thing. What do we do about it? But we never sort of unpack how we got here. So we'll do that first, and then we'll talk about some more gifts, or some more strategies, excuse me, to get these gifts. We'll talk about a couple of advanced strategies, and then we'll make sure we have time for questions and answers. Small note, by the way, in case this is your first time, we will send the recording and the slides around after the fact. So you don't have to furiously take notes unless that's helpful for you to learn. So just know that that's possible. Quick introductions. My name is Patrick. I'm very, very lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of an organization called FreeWill, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny. The other big thing that's bringing me joy this week is that Jenny is now back from maternity leave. So we're teaming up again after 3 months off with her new son, Mark. So we're very excited that Mark is healthy and happy. And then the FreeWill team, you'll see a lot of research here, a lot of work generally, and I just wanted to make sure that it's acknowledged that a lot of different folks on the team have made it possible, and not just me. And the team now is almost 100 people and crossed $3.6 billion in giving this week, which is very, very exciting. Okay, before we dive in, one thing we like to do sometimes is give a gift to all of you as a thank you for coming. So not to everybody, because that is wildly expensive. But we're going to send this book to 20 people chosen at random from the survey. It's a book called Designing Your New Work Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And so just a little bit of background on this book and why I think it's so important at the moment. Bill and Dave teach a class at Stanford for undergraduate students. It's called Designing Your Life. And it basically takes the theory of design thinking and applies it to your life choices. And these are college seniors for the most part, or college juniors, who are actually deciding among wildly different options what they might want to do with their life. And it's one of the sort of lessons that there's a lot of schooling at a lot of levels, and rarely does it teach you how to make really, really big decisions about marriage, about kids, about professional, about geography, et cetera, et cetera. And so Dave and Bill have been thinking about this for decades now, and have now done something that's really focused on professionals to think, okay, how do I actually structure my work life in a way that is fulfilling and happy and exciting? And so I'm happy to do that. We know that a lot of you are sort of rethinking the role that work plays in your life, rethinking how your role actually operates. And so this felt like a very good time to do it. So make a note in the survey, not in the chat, in the survey. And if you'd like to send you a copy, tell us where to send it, and we'll give that out to 20 folks. So really exciting. Love this book. If we don't end up giving you a copy, it's not that expensive. Strong recommend to actually go out and get it on your own. All right, so we asked folks how your week is going, and it's just worth naming that it's sort of been a hard week. So you can see that happiness and anxiety are close to meeting, which has not happened since January, and January 7th would have been the day after the storming of the Capitol. And so what's happening in the world, obviously the Delta variant, a hurricane bearing down on the East Coast, a bunch of other things happening. And so just naming this, that this is true across our community and potentially true among your donors. And so keeping this in mind as we go forward. Also, as we think about sort of reshaping our own happiness in the years going forward, hopefully that book will be useful as well. We also asked folks how confident you are about hitting your goals this year. And it's also worth sharing that there's been a slight decrease over the past few weeks, right? So as the world gets a little bit more complex, what we're seeing here is that actually we're down just 0.1 from 2 weeks ago. And you can see a little bit of a shift over time. So you can see this shifts over time, and the number of 5s are going down, the number of 4s are going down a little bit, and then more people are in the 3s. So I hope this is helpful to sort of level set across your whole peer group here. Okay, so that's where we are today. It's a little bit about you all right now. It's a little bit about me. Let's dive into donor advised funds, which are probably one of 3 wildly important stories in philanthropy today, right? So I think there are probably 3 or 4 massive trends affecting global philanthropy, and particularly in the United States, which is where most of you all are, and they're probably this, right? So one is, in no particular order, the rise of donor advised funds and how dominant they've become as a giving vehicle. 2 is the overall shift to non-cash giving and how determinative that is of overall success. 3 is the massive shift towards online giving, and that is increasingly true among major and planned giving, as well as things like email and small dollar donation. And then 4, the coming great wealth transfer, which is going to make planned giving one of the dominant ways of giving over the next 10 years. So when we think about sort of the broad trends that are happening in the world of giving, those are probably the 4 biggest stories. And so we're going to dive in on DAFs today. When we asked you how you feel about donor advised funds, this is the word cloud of responses. So what you can see here is there's sort of this yin and yang here, the opportunity, potential, hope, excited, but also things like confused, unsure, curious, anxious, untapped, and so on and so forth. And so you can see that people see this as a big opportunity and yet might not always know exactly what to do about it, uncertain, certainly the future. And so let's dive in here as well. What is a donor advised fund at all? So we'll get to some first principles here, and then we can dive much more into what to do about it. So at its core, donors put money into an investment fund with a sponsoring organization that then recommends grants out to a charity at a later point. This sponsoring org is typically a 501c3, which makes it a tax-deductible nonprofit gift. Donors get an immediate tax benefit, even if the money doesn't go to charities for years. And while donors technically recommend grants, so you always hear about grant recommendations, sponsoring organizations extremely rarely go against the donor's wishes, right? Because if they started doing that much more often, people would put their money into a different donor advised fund. And so the incentive structure is for the donor advised funds to adhere to the donor's wishes as much as humanly possible within the bounds of the law. Money in the fund is usually invested in this account, usually in mutual funds. So the fund grows over time with that money. And a sponsoring organization, especially these large national DAFs, usually make money on management fees, typically twice. So what does that mean? It might mean you have a small fee, which is a percentage of the total assets in the donor advised fund. And if you have a Fidelity account and you invest your donor advised fund in a Fidelity 2025 account or mutual fund or whatever, they also get a management fee on that mutual fund. So you have both the management fee for the overall DAF account and then usually management fees within the mutual funds. So that's basically the business model of a large national donor advised fund, just so we all understand how those operate. What can donor give to a donor advised fund? Well, most accounts require minimum contributions between $5,000 or $25,000, but there is an overwhelming trend towards lower minimums. And why is that? Well, it turns out with more technology, the cost of an account setup for one of these banks or these custodians is getting cheaper. There's a real race to get as many customers as possible. They trust that those accounts are going to grow over time, so the minimums are coming down. Donors can contribute cash, they can contribute stocks, or what we call publicly traded securities, other types of stocks, they can contribute Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, they can contribute mutual funds, they can contribute non-publicly traded assets like a share of a business or even real estate. And so there's a lot of different things that you can give here. There are 3 types of donor advised funds. There may be more, but these are really the dominant types. So the first is community foundations. These are sort of the oldest type, independent organizations created by and for people in a local area. There are a couple of similar foundations that may be less geographically specific, but most foundations like this will be focused on a particular geography. There are national donor advised funds, or DAFs. These are charitable arms of financial custodians like Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard. And then third, this is a little bit rare. There are single issue organizations, institutions that create donor advised fund programs to mobilize members around a certain identity, faith, or cause, usually within the context of a nonprofit. So some universities, especially very large ones with very large endowments, have their own donor advised funds. Some hospitals, again, the very large ones with very large endowments, have their own. A couple of national organizations have their own. This tends to be relatively uncommon. For the most part, I wouldn't worry about this in your role, but I just wanted to name it as something that exists. When we ask people, is increasing donor advised fund gifts a priority for your organization? What you can see as the answer is mostly yes. So about 25% say a very high priority, 39% say a somewhat high priority, and then 27% say medium priority. And you can see that you look at this sort of low priority, only 6% say somewhat low, and not a priority at all is actually too small for the number to fit on this. Let's call it 3 or 4%. So what are the actual challenges that people face? Well, 80% of folks say, meaning fundraisers, say, I need help figuring out who has a donor advised fund. 70% say, I don't know how to market DAFs. 37% say, I struggle to find out the identities of people who give us donor advised fund gifts. And then 7% say, I wish these gifts would arrive faster. Right? So these are the primary challenges among this group of people in terms of donor advised funds. When we ask how confident people feel about ability to secure DAFs, there's an average of 3.2. 7% say not confident at all, 3 is 40%, and only 9% are very, very confident. So this 9% is one of the lowest numbers we've seen, with possibly the exception of cryptocurrency, where this sort of really strong confidence around getting cryptocurrency gifts is even lower. So how do donor advised funds show up at our doorstep as a massive force in philanthropy? Let's dig into this a little bit. So when we asked you, do you expect to receive more DAF gifts in 2021? Almost half said yes, half said I'm not sure, and the remainder said I don't. The answer is no. So what we see is that people expect generally this to be on the rise, and it's continuing a decade-long sprint in terms of the growth of donor advised funds. So money is going into donor advised funds, meaning money entering these accounts is growing extremely quickly. So this is the total value of contributions to DAFs each year. You can see this is from our friends at NPT, by the way, so thank you for this research. And you can see they reached almost $40 billion in 2019. What we estimate is that by 2021, it will be $50 to $55 billion of money going into donor advised funds. Now, just as proxy, between $400 and $500 billion total goes into any charity in a year. So we're looking at a really strong increase as a percentage overall going into donor advised funds. Part of this is that more and more donors are opening donor advised funds. So the total number of donor advised funds accounts in 2019 is 873,000, which is more than triple the number only 4 years ago. So you can see how fast this trend is going. On average, all DAF sponsors, meaning any DAF, added about 90 new DAF accounts, but the national sponsors are adding more than 1,000 a year each, including some of them adding way more than that. So most of the growth is happening at this national DAF level, and we'll unpack more of why that is in a moment. Money coming out of donor advised funds, meaning these recommended grants, which are really just donations out of a DAF, are happening faster and faster. But you can see that they're smaller than the amount of money going in, so about $28 billion in 2019. We estimate by 2021 that will be about $30 to $40 billion in terms of money coming out of donor advised funds, which is a really sizable percentage of overall philanthropy. And then what's happening is that money coming out of DAFs is growing even faster. So in 2019, DAFs granted more than 27 billion, but the payout rate is over 20% since 2015. So single issue sponsors, remember those are like Notre Dame's individual DAF. has the highest payout rate, about 28%. Community foundations tend to have the lowest payout rate. The other really important thing to know is that money inside DAFs is growing very quickly as well. So there's $141 billion in 2019 sitting in donor advised funds. And we estimate that this year, right now, there's between 150 and $200 billion sitting in donor advised funds, right? I mean, this is just an astounding sum overall, and it may be even larger. This could be a conservative estimate. So very quickly, why are these growing so quickly? Well, two things. One is a whole bunch of people are shoveling money in, but then also remember these accounts are all invested. So when the stock market goes up by 20% over the course of a year, any money that hasn't been granted out also goes up by 20% on average, right? Some of these investments are going to be worse, some are better. But what you can see is that the money in DAFs is growing in a compound interest format because of the fact that they're actually invested and not just sitting there. When you look at DAFs as a percentage of total individual giving, by 2019, this was 13% of all giving. And we think that that's going up so quickly. I mean, 2011, it was only 5%. And so 2 years after 2019, right now, this year, it should be between 14 and 17%. Right? You can tell how important this is across the board. So let's talk about how the different types are growing differently. So we actually can't think of donor advised funds as a monolithic experience because community foundations and national DAFs and these single issue DAFs are so variant in their behavior. So community foundations, $40 billion, great, 11% growth, but national DAFs are growing at 28% faster, $87 billion. And this 20% is actually vastly different than 11% because it means that it's going to double twice as fast. And the exponential growth there means that national DAFs are really running away with the ball game here. So $87 billion and faster growth means that national DAFs are really separating themselves from community foundations. Single issue DAFs tend to be much smaller, 8% growth. Again, this is probably not going to be relevant for your organization unless you're one of a few very, very large entities. So let's focus on why DAFs are growing faster than everything else. So reason one is what's happening is in 2018, tax changes took effect. These were enacted in 2017. It's called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, signed by Republican Congress and then President Trump, making it more beneficial for some donors to give a large lump sum in 1 year and spread out their DAF grants over several years. Only about 10% of people itemize tax deductions now, compared to 30% in 2017. And this is why things like qualified charitable distributions, which are gifts out of your IRA, are exploding also. So the reason number two is that donors are increasingly looking to give non-cash gifts like stock. Partly this is increases in the stock market are making these assets much more valuable. So those donations going into DAFs are getting larger because there's just more money in the world because investments have been so strong. And the second is that donors are getting a lot smarter across the board about giving stock because of the tax benefits, which can mean up to 70% savings on a gift. So the third reason though, and this is why national DAFs are separating themselves from other folks, is that while tax changes and donor behavior are changing, all of these, all the three types of DAFs are having the same macro effects here, right? Tax changes and donor behavior. So what's different about national DAFs compared to community foundations and single issue orgs, or even compared to many nonprofits overall? So national DAFs are acquiring new donors at an accelerated rate, and so they must be doing something different to be driving such growth. What's happening is that they're making it really, really easy and intuitive to give stock and other non-cash gifts. And that's the reason that they're driving so much growth. So 64% of contributions into Schwab Charitable, which is the DAF of Charles Schwab, are non-cash assets. It's not actually just someone writing a check. And this number is similar at other areas. So that's the big difference, right? The national DAFs are making it really, really easy to give non-cash assets, and people now realize how important these non-cash assets are to give, and so that's why they're growing so much faster. It's also a really good lesson for all nonprofits to think about how do we make this better. All right, so let's talk about some steps to actually get more of these gifts. We've established that there's well over $100 billion sitting in donor advised funds. We know that there's more and more money going into donor advised funds, and that the money going in donor advised funds is growing year over year. So not only is this hyper important in 2021, it is likely to be more important in 2022 and even more important the year after. So as folks are building their careers, building their teams, and really positioning your organization for the future, this is super, super important. So how do we actually get more of these gifts? First one is to understand donors. So you are all here because you want to learn more about donor advised funds. Remember, only about 7% of you said I'm a 5 in terms of really understanding these gifts and knowing how to get them. What that means is that with hundreds of thousands of new accounts opened in the last few years, they're also very new to your donors. So your donors may still be trying to understand how to use them. And what it means is that you can also shape behavior now for decades to come, right? So they're new to you. You are a professional fundraiser. They're even more confusing to your donor. 79% of donors are over 50, but also in 2019, we begin to see the rise of millennial DAF giving, right? Part of this is that some workplaces are adding donor advised funds as a perk. So instead of having to walk down to a community foundation, which you've never had interaction with, suddenly there may be some moments of saying, okay, well, let me just put in 10% of my income into this DAF, which is now automatically deducted from my paycheck. So that's why that's growing. What you can see here is that even as the amount of money of in donor advised funds goes up, the average account goes down. Now, why is that? Is that because people are giving so much out? No, it's actually because there are just more people and it's going down market, meaning more folks who are not super wealthy or even what we call mass affluent are opening donor advised funds. So they're becoming more and more ubiquitous over time. The other thing we want to think about is don't forget about board members. As we really try to capture the picture of who a donor advised fund donor is, previous board members are always, not always, mostly underutilized by nonprofits, but they fit the demographic, the psychographic, and behavioral trends of DAF donors. So you want to make a list of past board members and call to check in on them as part of your year-end fundraising strategy. So this is sort of first thing to write down in terms of what are we actually doing here. The second thing is that DAFs should be an option every time you send donation asks around marketing. So there should be a gift from my donor advised fund link on your donate page, a checkbox, I have a donor advised fund and would like to learn more about giving to an org this way, and a question in every survey you sent. Remember, uncovering a donor advised fund donor is so valuable because you know that that person now has a giant pot of money that they can no longer access for their own personal expenses or anything else. It has to go to charity. So it's almost like having a personal foundation. And these people are the folks that are most likely to be giving you large gifts in the future. So even knowing that someone has a donor advised fund may be more valuable than getting a small cash gift from somebody else. Step 3 is we want to ask in every major donor conversation. So if you're talking to a major donor, the odds that they have a donor advised fund is going up every year. And here's one way to phrase it so it doesn't seem too inquisitive or invasive. Many of our supporters give out of a donor advised fund. Would you like information on how other people are using their DAFs to have a bigger impact? And they might say, no, I don't have one of those. Or yeah, that would actually be quite useful. I'd love to learn how other people are using their donor advised funds. And that will help you know. You may also want to develop one or more donor advised fund stories. Okay, step 4. Tag everyone you find through surveys and conversations, even if they haven't given this away yet, right? So you want to build a pool of folks who you know have a donor advised fund and constantly be expanding that pool. You may have to repurpose a different tag if your CRM doesn't have one of these. You should also just tell your CRM to build one because obviously this is one of the ways of giving of the next 10 years. And then the 5th thing is you want to add this language to the donor advised fund section to give. When you make a donor advised fund gift, it's possible that the sponsoring organization will not share your information with us. This is actually very, very common. Please send us a note at this email address or fill out this form, whatever you have, when you've made a gift so we can make sure to thank you and make sure your gift gets to where it's intended. So especially if you're a college or a hospital and you don't just have one general fund, but you have 1,000 different options, and many of you will have 3 or 4 if you're a smaller nonprofit, it's really important that that gift goes where the donor intends it. And if they're just typing in your EIN from the Fidelity website, that might not happen. And so your ability to steward, thank, show the impact of the gift, get another gift, repeat and repeat and repeat for 10 years only happens if you really know who that donor is and make sure you're getting that information. Step 6, how do we actually interact with these donor advice funds? Well, with national DAFs, mostly the advice is to save your energy. They do not have an active role in recommending nonprofits. So what we often hear and say, folks will say, I reached out to Fidelity and I never heard back. But Fidelity doesn't play an active role. They're not seen as philanthropic experts here. And so outreach to national DAFs may be a poor use of your time. You want to focus instead on supporting and cultivating your donors and supporters. You do want to do small things like make sure your GuideStar profile is up to date, since this can be used as a resource for national DAFs. And you do want to understand the massive growth of accounts of these entities, right? So you want to make sure you're educated about what's happening here, but it's not as though your call to Vanguard is going to really generate more giving. Now, community foundations are the opposite, right? They are seen as philanthropic experts. They have a much more active role in recommending nonprofits, especially if you're a local charity. And so you want to be proactive now. Set up coffee or tea or a Zoom call, obviously, with foundation staff to understand what they are looking to fund, right? So don't just go there and pitch, we do great work in the community, whatever. Ask, what are your donors and what are folks within the foundation looking to fund? And then you can come back to them when you actually have a great fit. And you want to share projects and funding opportunities instead of simply saying great things about your organization. And these very specific, sort of, hyper-specific, bounded giving opportunities are really the stuff that's going to work well with community foundation donors, because they'll think, oh, Charles and his spouse give a lot to this particular thing, and so maybe I can connect the dots here. So that's a really important point. Think about funding opportunities as opposed to your organization overall. Let's see if the slides will advance. All right, a really, really important additional point is one of the best ways to get good at donor advised funds is to be great at stock giving. So what do we mean by this? Well, 2/3 of all money going into DAFs is non-cash assets, primarily stock. And part of that is because DAFs make it super easy to give large non-cash gifts. And this is largely responsible for their overall growth. And so if you can make sure and remind both your donor advised fund donors and your other donors that it's very easy and accessible for you to take stock gifts, many will skip the DAF, right? They see it as a way to sort of liquidate it and smooth things out. And so what you really want to do is say, great, forget the middleman, come right to us and just give us the stock, we'll liquidate it, we'll give you a receipt, and then you'll have impact even faster. That's a really appealing thing. Many donors don't know that they can give you stock. And so, or they don't know how to give you stock, and Fidelity's right there sort of with open arms. And so you being more welcoming of stock gifts will actually take some of this money before it goes into donor advised funds and go directly to your organization. And so in normal fundraising emails, start including asks or notes around stock giving. And so instead of just saying, hey, please consider donating, you might want to say using credit card, gifts of stock, or your donor advised fund. So you start to really build in this context of, oh, I can give large gifts this way as well. You really want to link to stock giving on your donate page, not just on your ways to give page. So that when people are in the process of giving, they think, oh, I may be able to make this much larger, much more impactful gift. One example here that we love to show is the Southern Poverty Law Center. Does great work. And you can see that this is when you click donate on their homepage or through an email, this is where it goes. This isn't some sort of hidden ways to give page. It's the core framework through which they're funneling donors. And that triggers the idea that, oh, I should be giving a lot more than I am right now because I'm doing this. All right, so that's some of the basics. I wanted to add a couple of bonus strategies for folks that are sort of more in that 3 and 4 category that you might not be thinking of that are going to be really important to donor advised fund success going forward. First one, suggest recurring gifts. Many donors do not know that recurring donations are an option for donor advised funds. So how do you actually suggest a recurring gift? You have to give a really strong reason why a recurring gift. So one of the biggest barriers to even more impact, this is the nonprofit speaking, is that we often don't have certainty around how much money will come in during a given year. Many people, now we're using social proof, choose to make a recurring gift because it allows us to plan more thoughtfully and make the most of your donations. You can always cancel if you change your mind, right? So what we have here is real clarity on the why, social proof, other people are doing this, and presenting it as a win-win. We can plan more thoughtfully, we can make the most of your donations, and you're not locked in. You can always cancel if you change your mind. So this type of language is really powerful in moving one-time donor advised fund givers to recurring DAF givers, and that can be a really, really valuable move. 2, ask about beneficiary designations. Many donors do not have beneficiary designations for their donor advised fund. So you can say things like, one thing I've seen is that many of our donors forget to add beneficiary designation. You may have already thought about it, but just in case, I wanted to raise it. Would you like me to talk through some of the options? And you can actually leave the sort of recommendation responsibility of a whole DAF to a particular charity, so that that charity can then basically liquidate the DAF and use it for real impact immediately if someone passes away. 3, remember matching gifts. So many donors don't know this, but employers often match grants from donor advised funds, not into donor advised funds, but from donor advised funds. And so just saying, thank you so much for your grant. You may already know this, but many of our supporters don't realize that they can get their donor advised fund gift matched by their employer, because your employer do matching gifts. And suddenly you've just doubled the size of some of these gifts, which is really valuable. And then 4, I think this is the last one. Using DAFs for highly complex gifts can be really valuable. So we talked about what percentage of gifts are cryptocurrency or non-cash. And most of those you should be able to take. But if there are things like a seaside house and you really don't want to go through the responsibility of finding a realtor, selling it, et cetera, you can say, do you have a donor advised fund? And if you do, you can donate it there. The DAF will help liquidate it for some fee, and then you can move the cash as well. And so it may save you time or resources or liability, right? The risk of some types of real estate is that you don't actually know what's living below the ground or what else might have to happen. And so you don't want to get stuck either with too much work or with some sort of financial liability on real estate. All right, so that is a big overview on donor advised funds and what you might want to do about it. So thank you. I know that went relatively quickly, but there's a lot of information we had to share. A couple of reminders on resources. We are going to send this book to 20 folks. So make a note in the survey. I believe my colleague Simone will drop the link to the survey in the chat now. So feel free to take a moment. In terms of new resources for you, we've also put together a whole donor advised fund 101 guide, which is everything you need to know to start fundraising on DAFs. This can be really useful for folks within your organization or just as a primer to sort of keep there in case you're walking into a conversation where you know a donor has a DAF. You might want to brush up on a few things. So just make a note in the survey if you want to receive this. 2 other quick things. On Thursday the 26th, so in 2 days, at 1 p.m. Eastern, so exactly 48 hours from now, we will be holding a demonstration by my colleagues Alyssa and Josephine, who are brilliant and wonderful. And that will walk through folks on different tools around stock giving and some planned giving that other nonprofits are using and how they're using them successfully. So if you'd like to join that, feel free. And then lastly, our wonderful, wonderful team is here if you want a one-on-one demo of things like a stock tool or the request tool or other things like that. So just make a note as well. All right, we're going to take a 60-second break. There seems to be a lot of questions, so I'm going to dig through the most popular ones now. I'm going to grab a little bit of water. If you can take this 60 seconds, it would be really helpful to fill out this survey. My colleague Simone has put that in the chat, so it's there. I'll look at questions, and then we'll meet back here in 60 seconds to go through some of the most common things. All right, great. There's a lot of questions, potentially more than 50. So we're going to pick a couple and go through those and then give everybody a little bit of time back. So the first question is from Hillary. With community foundations and single issue organizations, can donors then choose to recommend grants for orgs outside of the community or the single issue? Or are they required to keep it in the community single issue? Hillary, great question. This varies by organization. Community foundations, I believe, tend to be relatively lax with these, although it certainly varies by community foundation. With single issue, and what we mean by single issue is really means single entity for the most part. So I believe the National Audubon Society has one, Notre Dame has one, Harvard has one, I believe Columbia has one. And those are really the sort of size and scope of charities that tend to do it. So there are two approaches there. Some folks say, look, we'll set this up and we'll just do it and there's no requirements. I'm going to make this up hypothetically because I don't know the exact numbers and I don't want to speak with too much authority, but frequently what will happen at a place like Notre Dame is they'll say, look, 60% of the money or 50% of the money has to go to one of many funds within Notre Dame, and the other half can go to any charity you like. And so that sort of split interest, meaning at least X amount has to go to Harvard or has to go to the National Audubon Society, and then the rest can go anywhere else. That tends to be the norm. Some places will say, look, it's totally open, and that will actually get the much larger donor advised fund gifts. As a note, this tends to be, there was another question of for whom is this appropriate for? Typically, you need to have an in-house investment team or similar to do one of these. And so a place like Notre Dame or Yale or Stanford or Harvard, or a couple of the really big entities will have in-house investment professionals who take all the money in the endowment and put it in places, right, to grow it, right? That's their strategy. And so they'll oftentimes co-invest the donor advised fund money to grow that, or they'll put it in sort of specific funds. And so remember, you have to be in charge of both the investments and the payout to have one of these. So they tend to be, there was a lot of enthusiasm about these 5 years ago. And I think it's sort of whittling down because it's actually quite complex to do it. All right, next question from Maureen. Are there increased tax benefits to contributing $10,000 to a sponsoring organization? In this case, she means a donor advised fund, versus the usual tax benefit of contributing to a specific nonprofit? Maureen, the answer is no. So a donor advised fund is a 501c3 charity, just like your local church or animal shelter or synagogue or what have you. And so they are treated by the IRS identically. As money leaves your personal account into a donor advised fund, it is treated as if you made a gift to the Red Cross or to your alma mater or whatever. So no difference there. Can donors make a bifurcated gift through a donor advised fund? For example, can a donor pay the deductible portion of a $5,000 table sponsorship at an auction? Or if I have to give a gift for basketball tickets and basketball tickets worth $50 and my donor advised fund contribution $150, can I do that? And I believe the IRS guidance is no, you cannot give bifurcated gifts. So if anybody is very smart about this stuff and wants to add it to the chat, please feel free. But my understanding at the moment is that you cannot split payment between DAFs and your own money. Yeah, thanks, Kate. Kate says no, you cannot split gifts. It's always nice to be confirmed as opposed to be wrong. So thank you, Julie, as well. There's a question that says, what do you mean by payout rates from donor advised funds? So payout rates means how much money is leaving a donor advised fund account and going to a charity that is not a donor advised fund. So that's the big question, right? So that's basically what we mean by payout rate. So if I have $100 to start the year and I give out $20 and then $80 stays in my account, payout rate is 20%. Venu says, thank you so much for this presentation. Thanks, Venu. One question I'm curious about is how to enter a donor advised fund into a CRM. This is a debate we're having, and I'm wondering if the DAF should be entered as a gift from the individual or should it be entered as a gift from the DAF with soft credit for the donor. Venu, it's really important to understand there's a difference between accounting and marketing and relationship management. For all intents and purposes, this is a gift from the donor. This is not, Fidelity has not decided that your organization is better than it was last year and doubled giving. It is a gift from the donor. They should be thanked. They should be stewarded. From an accounting perspective, they should not get a tax deductible receipt. And if this becomes the largest donor in your 990s, et cetera, that actually becomes Fidelity and not the donor. But you should actually treat that donor exactly like you would any other major donor. And so you don't want to set, you don't need to send thank you cards to Fidelity or Schwab. You need to be sending those directly to the donor. And so from your CRM perspective, which is largely a management question, a marketing question, you really want to make sure that you're really focused on the donor and thanking her for that gift. So that's a really important differentiation. Okay, more questions. Do you think that DAF, meaning donor advised funds, will drop as boomers and Gen X age out? Do you think younger generations will invest and give this way? Well, just as a small note, Gen X, the oldest Gen X folks are 50. So you've got 30, 40, 50 more years of Gen X giving. So I don't think that we're seeing Gen X age out anytime soon. But no, I think that donor advised funds are continually refining their craft. And frankly, they're innovating faster than much of the nonprofit world. And so I would assume that the donor advised funds will only grow over time, and that it's really important to get this right, because it's only more important next year, and it's only more important the year following. Jean says, could the lower growth at community foundations be because community foundations pay out more generously than commercial DAFs? Obviously, the objective is not to increase assets under management, it's actually to help the community. Jean, this is a great question, but actually, when we did the research, community foundations have a lower payout rate than national DAFs. So there's more money sort of sitting there and building over time in community foundations than national donor advised funds. There are some questions, by the way, around pledges. I believe that pledges in the sort of contractual sense can't be fulfilled through DAFs. If anyone wants to comment on that, that would be really helpful. Do donors need our EIN to make a gift from donor advised funds? I want to make it easy for people to give, and if it makes it easier to post on the website, I will. Yes, they typically do. There's some searchable tools for many of these funds, but especially if you have a somewhat common name, it's really important to be extra specific here. So if you're a Humane Society, if you're a United Way chapter, local United Way, you really want to make sure you have all this information that's super clear. So that's there. Leslie, pledges cannot be paid with DAFs. Okay, last question. Is there an increase in Bitcoin and crypto as non-cash assets going to DAFs? This is from David. Yes, so Fidelity, we ran a session on crypto a couple weeks ago, and Fidelity did say that the amount of money going into DAFs that is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency doubled last year. And so you're really seeing an accelerating trend there, and understanding crypto is really important. Crypto giving is much smaller than donor advised funds. So if you're only going to put the focus on one, put it on donor advised funds, but it is a fast rising way, and it's really emblematic of how donor advised funds are playing this role of taking more complex assets. So we'll pause on questions there. There's a lot of thoughtful commentary in the chat. So thank you so much for those of you that are contributing there. Let's see if we can advance these slides and we'll wrap up. Okay, so next steps. Please fill out the survey in Zoom if you haven't already. Thank you, Simone, for reposting that. The next webinar is September 14th, and we're going to talk about the state of planned giving in 2021. There's been so much changing over the last 12, 15, 18 months in planned giving. Small note, August is it was Make a Will month, still is, and is off the charts planned giving. Just incredible, more than double what we've seen in any previous month. That's a credit to a lot of folks. And so make sure to join that. We'll talk about how that's changing and what some of the macroeconomic environment does to planned giving right now. And then if you have any creative ideas to share, if you need anything at all, I'm just Patrick at FreeWill. So feel free to reach out. A really, really big thank you. So really just sort of delighted to be here. Thank you all for pushing yourselves and learning more. I know there's a lot going on in the world, a lot for you professionally, a lot for you personally, I'm sure. And so being able to spend this time together was really, really nice. So thank you again. I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Have a really wonderful Labor Day. Hope you all enjoy the rest of summer and find some more things that bring you lots of joy. So thanks again, and look forward to chatting to you very soon.